"You can stay here tonight," he said. Mafia boss took in the homeless single mother and her baby. The wind off the harbor was not just cold, it was malicious. It cut through the thin wool of Grace Miller's coat like a serrated knife, seeking the warmth she was desperately trying to hoard for the small bundle pressed against her chest. Harborview was a city of steel and glass, towering monuments to wealth that reflected the moonlight, but down here on the pavement, it was nothing but concrete and indifference. Grace adjusted the worn straps of the baby carrier, her shoulders aching with a burning, rhythmic throb that she had stopped noticing hours ago. Noah was heavy, heavier than a 6-month-old baby should feel, but that was only because her own strength was failing. He was sleeping now, his small face turned inward toward her heartbeat, a knit cap pulled low over his ears. Thank God he was sleeping. If he cried, the sound would shatter the last fragile piece of composure she was holding on to. She had walked 4 miles today. She knew it was 4 miles because she had counted the blocks, measuring the distance between the hopeless stops she had made. The shelter on 4th Street had been her first hope. It was a brick building with peeled paint and a line of souls wrapping around the corner. When she finally reached the front, the woman behind the plexiglass had not even looked up. "Full up," she had said. "Try the Mission on 8s." Grace had walked to the Mission on 8s, only to find a sign taped to the door stating they were at capacity for women and children. Then came the motel. It was a seedy place with a neon sign that buzzed with the sound of an angry insect. The clerk had looked at her, then at the baby, and then at the crumpled bills in her hand. "Credit card required for incidentals," he had said, picking his teeth with a matchstick. "No cash rentals after 10 at night. Policy," Grace had pleaded, humiliating herself, begging him to just take the cash, but he had waved her off. Now, it was past midnight. The temperature was dropping fast, threatening to dip below freezing, and the city felt like a closing trap. She checked her pocket again, her fingers brushing the few coins and bills she had left. $11.40. That was her entire net worth. She needed to get out of the wind. That was the only thought in her mind. Just for an hour, just until she could feel her toes again. Ahead, the yellow glow of a 24-hour diner spilled onto the sidewalk. The sign read simply, "The Anchor." It looked tired and greasy, but it looked warm. Grace pushed open the glass door, the bell above it jingling with a cheerful sound that felt mocking given her reality. The heat hit her instantly, smelling of stale coffee, frying bacon, and floor wax. It was heaven. She kept her head down, moving toward a booth in the back, away from the windows. The place was nearly empty. A truck driver sat at the counter nursing a mug of black coffee, and a couple of college students were arguing quietly in a far corner. Grace slid into the vinyl booth, wincing as she unbuckled the carrier. Her back muscles screamed in protest as the weight shifted. She pulled Noah out gently, keeping the blanket wrapped tight around him. He stirred, making a small, unhappy sound, and she quickly shushed him, rocking him against her shoulder. "Please do not cry," she begged silently. "If you cry, they might kick us out." A waitress with tired eyes and hair pulled back in a severe bun appeared at the table. She held a notepad, her gaze lingering on the baby for a second too long. "Just coffee?" the waitress asked. Grace hesitated. If she only ordered coffee, they would not let her stay long. She needed to look like a paying customer, like someone who belonged here, not a vagrant seeking shelter. "I will have the toast," Grace said softly, "and a cup of hot water, please. I have my own tea bag." The waitress sighed, scribbling on the pad, $2. Grace nodded. She could afford $2. It meant no bus fare tomorrow, but tomorrow was a problem for the woman she would be when the sun came up. Right now, she just needed to sit while she waited. Grace adjusted the blanket, creating a small tent over herself and Noah. She began to nurse him quietly, her eyes darting around the room, scanning for threats. This was the instinct she had developed over the last 3 weeks of living nowhere. You never relaxed. You never closed both eyes. You watched the door, and you watched the people who watched you. Across the diner, in the corner booth that commanded the best view of the entrance and the exits, Two men were finishing a conversation that had drained the color from the face of the busboy clearing the nearby tables. Luca Romano did not look like a man who ate at diners, especially not ones with cracked vinyl seats and flickering fluorescent lights. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than the building they were sitting in, the fabric tailored perfectly to a frame that was broad and powerful. His dark hair was swept back, revealing a face that was strikingly handsome but hard, like a statue carved from granite. His eyes were the color of espresso, dark and unreadable, and they missed nothing. Sitting across from him was Marco, his right-hand man and oldest friend. Marco was stockier, with a scar running through his eyebrow and a perpetual look of suspicion. "The union rep will fall in line," Marco said, keeping his voice low. "He knows what happens if the docks stop moving." Luca nodded once, dismissing the topic. He took a sip of his black coffee, his gaze drifting lazily across the room. He was bored. The business with the union was necessary but tedious. His life was a series of managed crises, a chessboard where he controlled every piece. It was efficient. It was profitable. It was incredibly lonely, though he would never admit that to a living soul. His eyes swept over the truck driver, dismissed the college students, and then landed on the woman in the back booth. She was new. Luca knew the regulars in his territory, even the ones at the bottom of the food pile. He had not seen her before. She looked wrecked. That was the first thing he noticed. Her coat was too thin for the weather. Her hair was a tangled mess of chestnut waves that looked like they had not seen a brush in days, and her skin was pale, almost translucent under the harsh lights. But it was her hands that held his attention. They were trembling. Not a coarse shake, but a fine, continuous vibration. He watched as she created a shield with a blanket, nursing the infant hidden beneath it. She was eating the dry toast the waitress had brought her with a kind of desperate efficiency, taking small bites and chewing thoroughly, as if trying to make the food last longer in her stomach. Something about her pulled at him. Maybe it was the way she kept looking at the door, her eyes wide and terrified. He knew that look. He saw it in the eyes of men who knew they were about to die. It was the look of a hunted animal. "What are you looking at, boss?" Marco asked, glancing over his shoulder. Luca did not look away. "Just a girl." Marco snorted, turning back. "Probably a junkie. Harbor View is full of them lately." "No," Luca said quietly, "not a junkie. Look at her shoes." Marco frowned. "What about them? They are worn out, but she has polished them recently. And she is nursing. A junkie would not be that careful with the baby. She's just poor." Luca watched as the baby fussed. The woman froze, her entire body tense. She put the toast down and began to rock the child, murmuring words Luca could not hear. The tenderness in her gesture was at odds with the harsh environment. It was a soft thing in a hard world, and Luca found he could not look away. After 20 minutes, the woman moved to stand up. She adjusted the heavy carrier on her chest, gathered her bag, and slid out of the booth. She took 2 steps toward the hallway where the restrooms were located, and then she stumbled. It happened in slow motion. Her knees simply gave out. She reached for the counter edge, missing it by an inch. Luca was moving before he made the conscious decision to do so. He was out of his booth and across the aisle in 3 long strides, just as the woman began to crumple toward the linoleum. His hand shot out, gripping her elbow firmly. He took her weight easily, steadying her. She was shockingly light, like a bird made of hollow bones. "Careful," Luca said. His voice was a low rumble, deep and smooth. Grace gasped, her head snapping up. For a moment, her vision was swimming with black spots, caused by hunger and exhaustion. When the world came back into focus, she found herself looking into the darkest, most intense eyes she had ever seen. The man holding her was terrifying. That was her first instinct. He radiated power and danger. He smelled of expensive cologne, leather, and something sharp like gun oil. His grip on her arm was ironclad, yet he was not hurting her. "I am sorry," Grace stammered, pulling her arm back. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "I am sorry, I stood up too fast." Luca released her slowly, ensuring she was steady on her feet before he let go completely. He looked down at her, seeing the panic flare in her hazel eyes. He saw the shame there, too, the deep, burning humiliation of poverty. "You need to sit down," Luca said. "Not as a suggestion, but as a command." "I am fine," Grace insisted, backing away. She clutched the baby carrier with both hands. "I just need to use the restroom. Then I am leaving." She hurried past him, ducking into the ladies' room as if escaping a fire. Luca stood there for a moment, staring at the closed door. Marco had stood up as well, watching with a confused expression. "Everything okay, Luca?" Marco asked. Luca ignored him. He turned to the waitress, who was wiping down the counter nearby. She looked nervous, avoiding his gaze. Everyone in Harborview knew who Luca Romano was, even if they never said his name out loud. "How long has she been here?" Luca asked. The waitress swallowed hard. "Just came in about half an hour ago. Mr. Romano, is she a regular?" The waitress hesitated, then lowered her voice, leaning in slightly. "She's been in here the last 3 nights. Never orders more than toast. Sometimes she falls asleep in the booth until the manager makes me wake her up. She's trying to make a soda stretch for 4 hours. It breaks my heart, honestly. With that baby and all." Luca's jaw tightened, a muscle feathered in his cheek. 3 nights. That meant she had nowhere to go. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a money clip. He peeled off a $100 bill and placed it on the counter. "Give her a meal, a real one, whatever she wants, and tell her it is on the house. Do not tell her it came from me." The waitress stared at the bill, her eyes widening. "Yes, sir. Of course." Luca returned to his booth, but he did not sit down. "Let us go. Marco." Marco looked at the unfinished coffee. "We are leaving? We are waiting outside." Grace splashed cold water on her face in the cramped restroom. She looked at her reflection in the dirty mirror. Dark circles bruised the skin under her eyes. She looked like a ghost. "You have to keep going," she whispered to herself. For Noah, she adjusted Noah's hat, kissing his sleeping forehead. He was so warm, so peaceful. He had no idea they were walking along the edge of a cliff. When she came back out, the terrifying man and his friend were gone. The diner was quiet again. She felt a wave of relief, followed by a sharp pang of hunger. The waitress walked over, holding a menu. "Honey, the cook made a mistake and whipped up a grilled cheese and tomato soup that nobody ordered. You want it? It is going to waste otherwise." Grace looked at the food. The cheese was melted and golden, the soup steaming. Her stomach cramped with need. She knew it was charity. Cooks did not make mistakes like that, but her pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. "Yes," Grace whispered. "Thank you." She ate quickly, feeding the strength back into her limbs. When she finished, she checked the clock on the wall. 1 a.m. The diner manager was glaring at her from the kitchen pass-through. It was time to move. Grace gathered her things. She wrapped her coat tighter, bracing herself for the cold. She pushed open the door and stepped out into the night. The wind hit her instantly, stealing the warmth she had just gained. The temperature had dropped significantly. It was bitter now, a killing frost settling over the city. She walked to the bus stop 10 yards away. The bench was metal and ice cold. There were no buses running until 5 in the morning. She knew that, but the bus shelter had 3 plastic walls. It broke the wind slightly. It was the only place she had. She sat down, curling her body around Noah. She tucked her legs up, trying to preserve heat. A sleek black car was idling at the curb a few feet away. The engine was a low, powerful purr. The windows were tinted so dark they looked like ink. Grace ignored it, focusing on breathing into her scarf to warm the air before it hit her lungs. The passenger window of the car rolled down smoothly. Grace froze. The man from the diner was sitting in the back seat, Luca Romano. In the darkness of the car, he looked even more imposing. The streetlights cast shadows across the sharp angles of his face. He was looking directly at her. "Get in," he said. Grace stared at him, her heart leaping into her throat. She gripped the diaper bag strap until her knuckles turned white. "Excuse me." "It is 20 degrees out here," Luca said. His voice was calm, devoid of threat, yet it carried an absolute authority. "That baby cannot be out in this. I am waiting for a friend." Grace lied. The words tumbled out, brittle and unconvincing. "He's coming to pick me up." Luca looked at her. He did not blink. He looked at the diaper bag that was deflated and nearly empty. He looked at her hands, which were shaking again as she counted the invisible seconds until he drove away. He looked at the terror in her eyes that fought with the cold. "You are lying," Luca said. It was not an accusation, just a statement of fact. "I am not," Grace said, her voice rising in panic. "Please, just leave us alone. You have nowhere to go." Luca continued, his voice steady. "You have been in that diner 3 nights in a row. You are counting nickels to buy toast. And right now, you are trying to figure out how to keep that child from freezing to death on a metal bench." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. The cruelty of the truth stung more than the wind. She stood up, intending to walk away, to go anywhere but here, under his dissecting gaze. "I do not want your money," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm not offering you money," Luca said. He opened the car door. The interior light flooded the back seat, revealing plush leather and warmth. He stepped out onto the sidewalk. He was tall, towering over her. Grace stepped back, shielding Noah instinctively. Luca stopped. He held up his hands slightly, palms open, showing he was not reaching for her. He saw the way she flinched. He saw the exhaustion that was dragging her down like an anchor. "I have a house," Luca said. "It is big, it is warm, and it has empty rooms." Grace shook her head frantically. "No, I cannot. I do not know you. My name is Luca," he said. "And you do not have to know me. You just have to know that I am not going to let you sleep on the street." He took a step closer, his voice dropping, losing its hard edge. He looked at the bundle in her arms. "It is not about you or me or owing anyone anything. It is about him." He gestured to Noah. Grace looked down at her son. The wind was whipping the corner of his blanket. His nose was cold to the touch. He was so small. If she stayed out here, he would get sick, or worse. She looked back at Luca. He was a dangerous man. Every instinct she had screamed it. The way he stood, the way he watched her, the car, the expensive suit. It all spelled trouble of a kind she had never known. But in his eyes, beneath the cold calculation, she saw something else, a strange, rigid kind of honor. He waited, letting her weigh the options, freezing to death or trusting a stranger. He finally said the line that broke her resolve. "You can stay here tonight," he said. It was simple. It was a command and an offer wrapped in one. Grace hesitated. She was torn between the terrifying reality of his power and the desperate, clawing need to keep Noah safe. She looked at the warm interior of the car. She looked at the desolate, frozen street. She made her choice. With a shaky nod, she stepped forward. "Okay," she whispered. Luca did not smile. He simply nodded, stepping back to hold the door open for her. Grace climbed into the back seat. The warmth enveloped her instantly, aggressive and wonderful. The leather was soft beneath her. She clutched her baby closer, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Luca got in beside her, closing the door and shutting out the wind. "Home," Luca said to the driver. The car pulled away from the curb, gliding smoothly into the night. Grace watched the city lights blurring past the window, streaks of gold and red against the black. She was terrified of where she was going, but for the first time in weeks, she was warm. Grace woke to the sensation of weightlessness. For a terrifying second, her mind scrambled, expecting the hard metal of a bus stop bench or the damp chill of a sidewalk. Instead, she was sinking into a mattress so soft it felt like a cloud. The air in the room was warm, regulated to a perfect, gentle temperature that settled over her skin like a blanket. She sat up with a gasp, her heart hammering until her eyes adjusted to the dim morning light filtering through heavy velvet curtains. This was not a shelter. It was a bedroom larger than the entire apartment she had shared with Tyler before everything fell apart. The walls were painted a soothing dove gray, and the furniture was dark, polished wood that gleamed even in the shadows. Noah. Grace scrambled out of the massive bed, her bare feet sinking into a plush rug. A crib had been set up in the corner of the room, a sturdy wooden structure that looked brand new. She ran to it, gripping the railing. Noah was asleep, his chest rising and falling in a steady, peaceful rhythm. He was dressed in a clean, soft onesie she did not recognize. On the nightstand beside the crib, a bottle warmer glowed with a small green light, keeping a bottle of formula at the perfect temperature. Grace exhaled, a sound that was half sob, half laugh. They were safe. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. They were inside. A polite knock at the heavy oak door made her jump. "Come in," Grace called out, her voice raspy from sleep. The door opened, and a stout, older woman with silver hair pulled back into a tight bun stepped inside. She carried a tray laden with food and folded clothes. Her expression was stern, but her eyes were kind. "Good morning," the woman said. "I am Rosa. Mr. Romano asked me to bring you these." Grace pulled the oversized t-shirt she had slept in, one that had been left for her last night, tighter around herself. "Thank you. Rosa, I do not know how to repay you for all of this." Rosa set the tray down on a small table. "You do not repay me, Mr. Romano pays me. He instructed me to tell you that there are toiletries in the adjoining bathroom. Everything is new. And he said to eat." "Where is he?" Grace asked, glancing toward the hallway. "Mr. Romano is working," Rosa said, her tone implying that questioning Luca's whereabouts was not done. "He values his privacy. You and the baby are to make yourselves comfortable in this wing of the house. If you need anything, there is an intercom on the wall. Press the button for the kitchen. For the next few hours." Grace felt like an intruder in a palace. She showered, the hot water washing away days of grime and the lingering chill of the streets. She dressed in the clothes Rosa had brought, simple, high-quality leggings and a soft sweater that fit her perfectly. She fed Noah, who cooed and kicked, clearly enjoying the warmth as much as she was. Yet, despite the comfort, the house felt like a fortress. Grace ventured out into the hallway, carrying Noah. She noticed the cameras immediately. Small, black domes mounted in the corners of the ceiling, their red lights blinking slowly. She was being watched. She saw Luca only once that morning. She was walking toward the staircase, intending to find the kitchen to return her tray. When she saw him at the end of the long corridor, he was speaking into a phone, his back to her. He wore a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, and he looked tense. "No," Luca said into the phone, his voice low and carrying a steel edge. "Tell them the shipment waits until I say it moves. If they have a problem with that, they can come talk to me. And Marco? Make sure they understand the consequences of impatience." He turned then, sensing her presence, his eyes locked onto hers from down the hall. Grace froze, clutching Noah tighter. Luca did not smile. He did not wave. He simply looked at her, his expression unreadable, a mixture of assessment and distance. Then he nodded once, briefly, and turned back to his conversation. Walking away toward his office, he was a ghost in his own home, a powerful force that moved the air around him but kept himself separate. Breakfast the next morning was an exercise in tension. Rosa informed Grace that Mr. Romano requested her presence in the dining room. Grace walked in. Feeling small in the cavernous space, the table was long enough to seat 20 people. Luca sat at the head, reading a newspaper with a cup of espresso near his hand. "Sit," Luca said, gesturing to the chair to his right without looking up. Grace sat. A high chair, another new purchase, had been placed next to her. She settled Noah into it, handing him a teething ring. "Thank you for the clothes," Grace said, breaking the silence. "And for the room, I will figure out a plan soon. I do not want to impose." Luca folded the newspaper and set it down. He looked at her, his dark eyes sweeping over her face. "You are not imposing, and you are not leaving until you have a plan that does not involve a bus stop." Grace looked down at her plate. "I am going to look for a job today." Luca took a sip of his coffee. "You have no address. You have no phone. How will they call you back?" "I will figure it out," Grace said, a spark of defensiveness in her tone. Suddenly, Noah let out a loud, bubbling laugh. He had dropped his teething ring and was reaching a chubby hand toward Luca, his fingers opening and closing in a grasping motion. Grace moved to stop him. "Oh, I am sorry. Noah, stop that. Let him be." Luca said. Grace paused. Luca was staring at the baby. The hard line of his mouth had softened, just a fraction. He looked at the small, flailing hand, then at his own large, scarred hand resting on the table. He's strong, Luca observed. He has a good grip. He's persistent, Grace corrected with a nervous smile. Luca reached out, extending one finger toward the high chair. Noah grabbed it instantly, his tiny fingers curling around Luca's index finger. Luca did not pull away. He sat there, tethered to the infant, his eyes wide with a strange curiosity. For a moment, the terrifying Mafia boss was gone, replaced by a man fascinated by the simple, fierce life force of a child. He likes you, Grace whispered. Surprised, Luca gently disengaged his finger, the mask slipping back into place. He likes anything he can grab. Eat your eggs. Grace, they are getting cold. The afternoon brought a different kind of storm. Noah had been fussy all day, likely reacting to the change in environment, but by 3 o'clock, the fussing had turned into full-blown screaming. Grace paced the length of the guest room, bouncing Noah on her shoulder. Her back ached, and her head was pounding. She had tried feeding him, changing him, burping him. Nothing worked. His cries were jagged, tear-filled shrieks that seemed to echo off the walls. "Please, Noah, please," Grace begged, tears pricking her own eyes. "Shh, baby, it is okay." She felt like a failure. Here she was, finally safe, and she could not even keep her baby quiet. She was terrified that Luca would come in and throw them out, tired of the noise disrupting his important business. The door opened. Grace spun around, panic flaring in her chest. "I am so sorry," she blurted out. "He just won't stop. I am trying. I promise I will get him to quiet down. Please do not be angry." Luca stood in the doorway. He was not wearing his suit jacket, and his tie was loosened. He did not look angry. He looked intense, focused. "He is not sick?" Luca asked, his voice cutting through the noise. "No," Grace said, bouncing harder. "He is just tired, overtired, and he fights sleep." Luca walked into the room. The space suddenly felt smaller with him in it. He stopped in front of her. "Give him to me," Luca said. "What?" Grace blinked, confused. "You are stressed," Luca said calmly. "He can feel it. Your heart is racing, so his heart is racing. Give him to me." Before Grace could protest, Luca reached out. His large hands encompassed Noah's torso, lifting him effortlessly from her arms. Grace felt the loss of weight instantly, her arms trembling from the exertion. She watched, holding her breath, as the dangerous man adjusted the tiny, screaming infant against his broad chest. Luca's hand, which she knew had held guns and undoubtedly caused harm, cupped the back of Noah's head with a tenderness that was shocking. Luca began to walk. He did not bounce frantically like Grace had. He moved with a slow, rhythmic sway, a heavy, grounding motion. He tucked Noah's head under his chin, and then he began to hum. It was a low, vibrating sound, deep in his chest. It was not a nursery rhyme. It sounded like an old melody, something in a minor key, perhaps Italian. The vibration seemed to resonate through the room. Grace watched, leaning against the crib for support, slowly, miraculously. Noah's screams turned to whimpers. The whimpers turned to heavy sighs. Within 5 minutes, the room was silent except for the low hum of Luca's voice and the sound of Noah's breathing. Luca stopped pacing and looked at Grace. The expression on his face was unguarded for the first time. His jaw was unclenched, his eyes soft as he looked down at the sleeping bundle on his shoulder. "He is out," Luca whispered. Grace stared at him. The relief was overwhelming, but underneath it, something else bloomed. A tightness in her chest that had nothing to do with panic. She saw the strength in his arms, the gentleness in his hands, and the way he was protecting her son. It was a dangerous thought, a dangerous feeling, but it was there, a spark of warmth that frightened her as much as the cold streets had. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. Luca walked to the crib and laid Noah down with the precision of a bomb disposal expert, ensuring the baby did not wake. He covered him with the blanket, his hand lingering for a second on Noah's back. "Get some rest." "Grace," Luca said, straightening up and turning to leave. "You look like you are about to fall over." That night, the house was silent. Grace could not sleep. Her internal clock was still set to survival mode, waking her at odd hours. She crept down to the massive industrial-style kitchen, needing a glass of water. She found a stack of dishes in the sink, remnants of a late meal Luca or his men must have eaten. Rosa had gone home for the night, without thinking. Grace turned on the water. It was something she could do, something she could contribute. She could not pay rent, but she could clean. She was scrubbing a heavy ceramic plate when she felt him. "You do not have to do that," a voice said from the doorway. Grace jumped, splashing soapy water onto the counter. She turned to see Luca standing there. He had discarded his tie completely, and his shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the hollow of his throat. He looked tired, the shadows under his eyes matching her own. "I wanted to," Grace said, turning back to the sink. "It is the least I can do. Rosa works hard." Luca walked into the kitchen. He did not tell her to stop. Instead, he grabbed a dish towel from the rack. "Wash," he said. "I will dry." Grace looked at him sideways. "You? Drying dishes?" Luca shrugged, leaning a hip against the counter beside her. "I have hands." They worked in silence for a few minutes. The only sounds were the running water and the clink of ceramic. It was intimate in a way that made Grace's breath catch. The domesticity of it felt strange and forbidden. They were standing close, the space between them charged with an electricity she tried to ignore. As she rinsed a spoon, the water hit the curve of the metal and sprayed outward. A jet of water hit Luca directly on the chest, soaking the front of his white shirt. "Oh my God!" Grace gasped, reaching for the towel at the same time Luca did. Their hands collided. Grace froze. Luca's hand was warm, his skin slightly rough against hers. Her fingers were tangled with his in the towel. She looked up, and he was looking down at her. The air in the kitchen seemed to vanish. Luca did not pull away. He held her gaze, his eyes dark and intense, searching her face. He was close enough that she could smell the soap on his skin and the faint scent of tobacco. She saw his gaze drop to her lips, then back up to her eyes. His hand tightened slightly over hers. For a second, the world narrowed down to just the two of them. The Mafia boss and the homeless mother, bound together by steam and silence. "I am sorry," Grace whispered, her voice barely audible. "The water?" "It is just water," Luca said. His voice was rougher than usual. He held the moment for a heartbeat longer, a heartbeat that felt like an hour before he slowly pulled his hand away. He stepped back, the loss of his warmth leaving Grace shivering. He wiped his shirt with the towel, his face closing off again, finished the glass, "Grace, then go to bed." He left the kitchen before she could answer, leaving her standing there with wet hands and a heart that was pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The bubble of safety burst the next evening. Grace was in the hallway, heading toward the library to find a book, when the front door slammed open. Heavy boots echoed on the marble floor. She peered around the corner. It was Marco, Luca's right-hand man. He looked furious, his face flushed, a sheen of sweat on his forehead. Luca met him in the foyer, his posture shifting instantly from relaxed to lethal. "Talk to me," Luca commanded. "They hit the shipment on the south side," Marco said, his voice loud and agitated. "The Riverside crew. Darius Hall is making a move. Luca, he's not just testing the fences. He's trying to burn them down." Luca's expression was terrifyingly calm. "Any casualties?" "2 of our guys in the hospital. 1 is critical." Grace covered her mouth with her hand, pressing herself back against the wall. This was not just business. This was war. "There is more," Marco said, lowering his voice. But the acoustics of the foyer carried the sound to Grace's hiding spot. "Darius knows about the house. He knows you have guests." Grace's blood ran cold. "He was asking around," Marco continued, "asking why Luca Romano is playing house with a stray and a kid. He thinks you are soft." "Luca?" "He thinks they are a weakness he can exploit. You need to move them, or you need to get rid of them." Grace stopped breathing. She was a target. Noah was a target. "Enough," Luca snapped. The sound of his voice cracked like a whip. "They are a liability," Marco insisted. "They are under my protection," Luca roared, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "That is the end of the discussion. If Darius Hall wants to come for my house, let him come. I will bury him in the foundation. But nobody touches the girl. Nobody touches the boy. Do you understand me?" Marco was silent for a long moment. "Understood, boss. But you are playing a dangerous game. Get the car ready," Luca said, his voice dropping back to a deadly quiet. "I am going out." Grace turned and ran back to her room, her bare feet silent on the floor. She made it to the guest room and closed the door, leaning against it, trembling. He was a criminal. She knew it, of course. But hearing about hospitals and burying men and turf wars, made it real. She was living in the center of a violent storm. An hour later, there was a knock on her door. Grace wiped her eyes and stood up straight. "Come in." Luca entered. He was dressed in black, a leather jacket over a dark shirt. He looked ready for violence. He saw the fear in her eyes instantly. "You heard," he said. Grace nodded, hugging her arms around herself. "I heard." Luca walked over to the window, staring out at the dark grounds where security guards patrolled with dogs. "I am not a good man." "Grace," Luca said quietly, not looking at her, "I have done things that would make you sick. I run a world that is built on blood and money. I never pretended to be a hero." Grace watched his back. "No, you did not." He turned to face her. The room was dim, lit only by a bedside lamp. He looked tired, the weight of his empire pressing down on his shoulders. "But I keep my word," Luca said. He took a step toward her. "I told you that you were safe here. That means you are safe." He reached out, his hand hovering for a moment before settling on her shoulder. His grip was firm, grounding, through the fabric of her sweater. His heat seeped into her skin. It was a comforting weight, a shield against the world outside. Grace looked up at him. She wanted to run. She should run. This man was dangerous. Being near him put a target on her back, but as his thumb grazed her collarbone in a subconscious caress, she felt a magnetic pull that terrified her more than the Riverside crew. She felt safe with him, and that was the most dangerous thing of all. "I will not let anything happen to Noah," Luca vowed, his eyes boring into hers, "or to you." Grace's breath hitched. She felt the urge to lean into him, to rest her head against his chest and let him carry the burden. But the image of Marco's bloody report flashed in her mind. She gently pulled away, stepping out from under his hand. "I know," she whispered, "but I do not want to be the reason you get hurt. Luca." Luca's hand fell to his side. His expression tightened. "The wall coming back up. Go to sleep. Grace, I will handle the rest." He turned and walked out of the room, closing the door softly behind him. Grace stood alone in the silence, listening to the heavy lock click into place, wondering if she was a guest or a prisoner, and wondering why, despite everything, she wished he had stayed. The gold embossed stationery on the desk in the guest room looked too expensive to write a grocery list on, but Grace used it to tally her debts. She sat at the small vintage vanity, the tip of the pen hovering over the numbers she had scribbled. She owed Luca for food. She owed him for diapers. She owed him for the roof over her head, even if he claimed she did not. Grace was not ungrateful. On the contrary, the gratitude she felt was so heavy it sometimes made it hard to breathe. But she was also terrified of becoming comfortable. Comfort was a trap. If she got used to the silk sheets and the chef-prepared meals, she would lose the edge she needed to survive when this temporary reprieve ended, and it would end. Men like Luca Romano did not play house forever. She stood up, smoothing the front of her blouse. It was one of the few items she still owned from her life before the streets. Today, she was going to find a job. She found Luca in the foyer, adjusting his cufflinks in the mirror. He watched her approach in the reflection, his face impassive. "I am going out," Grace announced, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Luca turned. He took in her appearance, the determined set of her jaw, the diaper bag slung over her shoulder, the stroller she had retrieved from the garage where Rosa had cleaned it. "To do what?" Luca asked. "To look for work," Grace said. I cannot just sit here. Luca, I need to build a life." Luca studied her for a long moment. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a sleek, black smartphone and a white envelope. He held them out to her. "Your phone was dead." He said, "My tech guys restored it and gave it a new battery. It is on a secure network now." Grace took the phone, her fingers brushing his. "Thank you. And this," Luca said, gesturing with the envelope, "is an advance." Grace frowned, not taking it. "An advance on what?" "I do not work for you." "Consider it a loan against future earnings," Luca said smoothly, pressing the envelope into her hand. "You need bus fare. You need lunch. You need to print resumes. You cannot get a job if you look like you are desperate. Grace, people smell desperation. It makes them offer you less than you are worth." Grace hesitated. She wanted to refuse. She wanted to say she could do it on her own. But she remembered the freezing wind at the bus stop and the way the motel clerk had sneered at her. Pride was expensive. "I will pay you back," she said firmly. "Every cent. I know you will," Luca said. He signaled to the door. "The driver is waiting. He will take you to the bus line on the edge of the district. Call him when you are done. Do not walk back here." Grace nodded, tucking the envelope into her bag. "I will see you tonight." Luca watched her leave, the heavy door clicking shut behind her. He waited until the SUV pulled away before he let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. He walked to the window, watching the vehicle disappear down the long, tree-lined driveway. "She is stubborn," Marco said, stepping out of the shadows of the living room. "She is a survivor," Luca corrected. The neighborhood of Northwood was a far cry from the gated elegance of Luca's estate, but it was cleaner than the docks. It was a working-class area, filled with small shops, laundromats, and diners. Grace pushed the stroller down the sidewalk, the wheels clattering over the cracks in the pavement. She felt exposed without the walls of the mansion around her. Every car that slowed down made her heart jump. Every siren in the distance made her grip the stroller handle tighter. She spent the morning going from door to door. The bakery was not hiring. The boutique on the corner needed someone with retail experience, which she had, but they also needed a permanent address for the tax forms. Grace had mumbled something about moving and left before they could ask more questions. By noon, her feet were aching. She stopped at a small coffee shop called The Daily Grind. It smelled of roasted beans and cinnamon. The manager, a frantic woman with flour on her apron, looked at Grace, then at Noah, sleeping in the stroller. "Can you work weekends?" the woman asked. "I can work whenever you need me," Grace said. "I am a fast learner. I can make espresso. I can clean." The woman sighed, wiping her hands on a rag. "Look, honey, I need someone reliable. Someone who is not going to call out because the baby is sick. He's very healthy." Grace lied, "And I have childcare arranged." It was a partial lie. She hoped Rosa would help, or that she could afford a sitter with her first paycheck. "Fill out an application," the manager said, sliding a clipboard across the counter. "No promises." Grace sat at a small table by the window, filling out the form. When she reached the line for address, she paused. She could not write down Luca's address. It would raise too many questions. She used the address of the old apartment she had shared with Tyler, praying they would not mail anything there. Outside, across the street, a man in a hooded sweatshirt sat on a park bench. He was reading a newspaper, but his eyes were not moving across the text. They were fixed on the coffee shop window. Tyler stared at the woman inside, his leg bouncing nervously. He looked worse than he had a month ago. His face was gaunt, his eyes rimmed with red. He had been looking for her for weeks, not because he missed her, and certainly not because he missed the kid. He needed to know she had not talked. When Grace had left, she had taken the stash of cash he had hidden in the cereal box. That was bad, but she had also seen the new suppliers he was meeting with if she went to the cops. Tyler was dead. The people he worked for now, the Riverside crew, did not tolerate loose ends. He watched as Grace stood up, handed the clipboard back, and walked out of the shop. She looked different. Her clothes were new. She looked clean. Not like someone living on the street. Tyler stood up, keeping a safe distance. He followed her down the block. He saw her stop at a cleaning service office. She came out 10 minutes later, looking hopeful. Then, a black SUV pulled up to the curb. It was a massive vehicle, polished to a mirror shine. The windows were tinted so dark they looked like oil slicks. Tyler froze behind a telephone pole. He knew cars like that. Those were not taxis. A driver in a suit got out. He opened the back door for Grace. He even took the stroller and folded it into the trunk with a respectful nod. Grace got in like she did it every day. "Holy H," Tyler whispered. He fumbled for his phone. His hands were shaking. He snapped 3 photos in rapid succession. One of Grace getting into the car, one of the driver, and one of the license plate as the SUV peeled away into traffic. He looked at the blurry images on his screen. The license plate was obscure, but the car was distinctive. He knew that specific make. He knew who drove cars like that in this city. Grace Miller had not just found a sugar daddy. She had found a shield. Tyler's fear morphed into a twisted kind of opportunity. He knew people who would pay for this. People who hated the owner of that car. He grinned, revealing yellowed teeth, and dialed a number he had been too afraid to call until now. Dinner that night was quiet. Luca had dismissed the staff early, leaving a pot of pasta puttanesca keeping warm on the stove. They ate in the smaller breakfast nook rather than the cavernous dining room. It felt more intimate, less like a business meeting. Grace swirled her fork in the pasta, the rich scent of tomatoes and capers filling the air. "Did you find anything?" Luca asked. He was pouring himself a glass of red wine. He held the bottle out to her, and she nodded. "A coffee shop took my application," Grace said, "and a cleaning service said they might have shifts next week. It is a start." "It is," Luca agreed. He sat opposite her. "You look tired. It is a good tired," Grace said. "It feels good to do something normal." She took a sip of the wine. It was smooth, tasting of dark cherries and oak. It was miles away from the cheap boxed wine Tyler used to buy. "Grace," Luca said, his voice dropping an octave. He set his glass down. "You never told me exactly why you left. I know it was bad. I know you were homeless. But women do not run into the winter night with a newborn unless they are running from something specific." Grace stopped eating. She looked at the dark window, seeing her own reflection. She saw the safety of the room around her, the man who had given her a bed and food without asking for anything in return. She owed him the truth. "His name is Tyler," she said softly. Luca did not move, but the air around him seemed to grow still. "We were together for 2 years, Grace continued, her voice steady but low. "He was charming at first, but he had a temper. He would punch walls, break things. He never hit me, not really, just shoves, grabbing my arm too hard." She unconsciously rubbed her left arm, remembering the bruises that had faded but never truly healed. "When I got pregnant, he promised he would clean up his act. He said he would get a real job. But then he started bringing things into the apartment. Packages, scales, white powder on the coffee table." Luca's jaw tightened, a muscle feathering near his ear. "I told him he had to stop," Grace said. "I told him I would not raise a baby around that. He laughed at me. He told me I was trapped. He said if I tried to leave, he would tell the courts I was an unfit mother. He said he would take Noah and put him in the system just to spite me." She looked up at Luca. Her eyes were dry, but they burned with the memory of that fear. "The night I left, he was high. He was meeting with some new guys, scary guys. They were talking about moving larger quantities. They were talking about guns. Noah was crying in the other room, and Tyler, he screamed at him. He threw a beer bottle at the crib. It missed, but the glass shattered everywhere." Grace took a shaky breath. "I waited until he passed out. I packed the bag, I took what cash I could find, and I ran. I did not look back." Luca was silent. His hand was resting on the table, clenched into a fist so tight his knuckles were white. The image of a man throwing a bottle at an infant ignited a cold, dark rage in his gut that he had to struggle to suppress. "He is a coward," Luca said. The words were quiet, but they carried the weight of a death sentence. "He's dangerous," Grace said. "He's desperate." "He's nothing," Luca countered. He looked at her. his dark eyes fierce. He is a ghost. Grace. He does not exist in this world anymore. If he ever shows his face near you, if he ever tries to come near that boy. He let the sentence hang in the air, unfinished but entirely clear. Grace reached across the table and covered his fist with her hand. Her palm was warm against his cold skin. "I feel safe here," she whispered. "I have not felt safe in a long time, but with you, I sleep. Noah sleeps." Luca looked down at her hand. He turned his fist over, opening his hand so their palms were pressed together. He laced his fingers through hers. It was a gesture of solidarity, of protection. "You are safe," he promised. After dinner, they moved to the living room. It was a massive space with a fireplace that stretched from floor to ceiling, but they sat on the plush leather sofa, the room lit only by the flickering light of the television. Noah was asleep in a portable crib they had set up in the corner, his soft breathing a rhythmic backdrop to the evening. Luca had put on an old black and white movie, something classic and slow-moving. He did not really care about the film. He just wanted the noise to fill the silence so he didn't have to talk about the violence rising in his blood. Grace sat on one end of the couch, tucked into the corner with a throw blanket over her legs. Luca sat on the other end, his arm resting on the back of the sofa. As the movie played, the distance between them seemed to shrink. Grace shifted, stretching her legs out. Luca shifted, getting comfortable. Slowly, inexorably, they gravitated toward the center. It was not a conscious decision. It was magnetic. Grace laughed softly at something on the screen. She leaned her head back, her eyes heavy. The wine, the food, and the emotional release of telling her story had drained her. "I haven't seen this movie in years," she murmured. "My dad used to watch it." Luca looked at her. In the soft light, the lines of worry that usually etched her forehead were smoothed out. She looked younger. She looked beautiful. "Rest your eyes," Luca said. "I will wake you when it is over." Grace hummed in agreement. She let her head loll to the side. Without thinking, she shifted closer to him, seeking his warmth. Her shoulder brushed against his ribs. Luca froze. He felt the contact like a brand. He should move away. He should maintain the boundaries he had set for himself. She was vulnerable. She was under his protection. But he did not move. Grace's breathing evened out. She slumped further, her head coming to rest on his shoulder. Her hair tickled his neck, smelling of the vanilla shampoo Rosa bought. Luca slowly, carefully, moved his arm from the back of the sofa. He draped it around her, his hand resting lightly on her upper arm. He felt the steady beat of her heart against his side. He looked down at her. Even in sleep, her hand was curled into a loose fist, as if she were ready to fight. She was so strong, yet so fragile. An ache bloomed in Luca's chest. It was a foreign sensation, sharp and terrifying. It was the ache of wanting to keep something. For years, his life had been about acquiring and defending territory, money and power, but holding this woman, hearing her child breathe in the corner. He realized that all his power meant nothing if he could not keep them safe. Their knees were touching now, a simple point of contact that felt more intimate than anything he had experienced in years. He sat there in the dark, guarding her sleep, wishing the night would never end. But the world outside the gates did not care about his wishes. The phone in his pocket buzzed. A harsh, vibrating intrusion. Luca gently eased himself away from Grace, careful not to wake her. She stirred, murmuring something unintelligible, and curled into the warmth he had left behind on the cushion. Luca walked to the hallway, his face hardening back into the mask of the dawn. He answered the phone. "Romano." "Boss, it is Marco. We have a problem." Luca walked further away from the living room, keeping his voice low. "What is it?" Security just flagged a vehicle near the main gate, a sedan. It did not try to enter, but it slowed down. "We checked the perimeter cameras. Someone was taking pictures." "Luca, pictures of the gate?" "No. Pictures of the house, and earlier today. One of the guys tailing the girl said he thought he saw a flash when she was getting picked up in Northwood. We thought it was just a reflection, but now." Luca's grip on the phone tightened. Someone was building a dossier. Did you get a plate? Partial. We're running it now. But Luca, if they are taking photos, they are planning something, or they are selling the info. Find them, Luca commanded. Find out who was in that car. And Marco, double the guard on the perimeter. Tonight. He hung up. He looked back into the living room. Grace was still sleeping, peaceful and unaware. The bubble of safety was already leaking. The next morning, the air in the house was heavy. Luca was waiting for Grace when she came down for breakfast. He was dressed in a dark suit, his tie knotted perfectly, his face unreadable. "Grace, sit down," he said. Grace paused, holding Noah. The warmth from the night before was gone, replaced by a professional distance that made her stomach churn. She sat. "What is wrong?" she asked. Luca placed a tablet on the table. On the screen was a grainy image taken from a security camera. It showed a sedan slowing down outside the gates. "Do you recognize this car?" Luca asked. Grace leaned in. It was a beat-up Honda, gray, with a dent in the rear bumper. Her breath caught in her throat. "Yes," she whispered. "Who does it belong to?" "It belongs to Tyler," Grace said, looking up at Luca with wide, terrified eyes. "He found us." Luca took the tablet back. He did not yell. He did not throw anything. He simply nodded, a cold, calculating motion. "He followed you yesterday," Luca said. "He took photos of you getting into my car, and then he came here to confirm the location." "I am sorry," Grace said, tears welling up. "I was careful. I did not see him. I swear. It is not your fault," Luca said firmly. "You are not trained to spot tails, but now we know." He stood up, buttoning his jacket. "What are you going to do?" Grace asked, clutching Noah. Luca looked at her. His eyes were dark, devoid of the softness she had seen the night before. "I am going to handle it," he said. "You are not to leave the house today. Grace, do not go into the yard. Do not go near the windows. Rosa will bring you whatever you need." "But Tyler made a mistake," Luca interrupted. "He came into my world. Now he has to live by my rules." He turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing on the marble. Grace watched him go, feeling a chill settle over her heart. She had wanted protection, but now she realized what that protection looked like. It looked like a man walking to war. Across the city, in a warehouse that smelled of diesel and stale smoke. Darius Hall sat behind a metal desk. He was a large man with a shaved head and a smile that never reached his eyes. The door opened, and a jittery man in a hoodie was shoved into the room by two of Darius's enforcers. Tyler stumbled, clutching his phone like a lifeline. "This the guy?" Darius asked, not looking up from his paperwork. "Yeah, boss. Says he has info on Romano." Tyler licked his lips, looking around the room nervously. "I got photos," he stammered. "I got proof. Romano is keeping my girl, and he is keeping the kid." Darius looked up. He extended a hand. "Show me." Tyler handed over the phone. Darius scrolled through the pictures. He saw Grace entering the SUV. He saw the distinctive Romano crest on the gate in the background of the night shots. He saw the weakness. "Romano has a soft spot," Darius mused. "A stray cat and a kitten." He tossed the phone back to Tyler. "You want your girl back?" Darius asked. "I want what is mine," Tyler said, trying to sound tough. "And I want to get paid." Darius smiled. It was a shark smile. "You will get paid," he said, "and you will get your girl. But first, you are going to help me break Luca Romano into little pieces." Darius stood up, walking over to a map of the city pinned to the wall. He traced the line of Luca's territory with a finger. "He thinks he is untouchable in that fortress," Darius said softly. "But every fortress has a back door. And you, my friend, you are the key." Tyler swallowed hard, realizing too late that he had stepped into a cage with a beast far bigger than he could handle. But there was no backing out now. "We are going to have some fun," Darius said. The storm was no longer on the horizon. It was overhead, and the first lightning bolt was about to strike. The doorbell rang at 2 p.m, a sharp, intrusive sound that cut through the quiet hum of the mansion. It was not the buzzer for the main gate, which meant someone had already bypassed the perimeter security or had been buzzed in by a guard who thought they had legitimate business. Grace was in the living room, folding a pile of Noah's laundry on the sofa. Luca was in his study, the door slightly ajar. When the bell rang, Grace froze. She had spent the last 24 hours looking over her shoulder, expecting Tyler to jump out from behind a curtain. Rosa walked to the door, wiping her hands on her apron. She opened it, and the sound of low, serious voices drifted down the hallway. Grace stood up, clutching a tiny pair of socks. Her heart began to hammer a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Rosa appeared in the doorway of the living room. Her face was pale. "Mr. Romano?" she said, her voice tight. "There is a woman here. She says she is from Child Protective Services." The blood drained from Grace's face so fast the room spun. She grabbed the back of the sofa to steady herself. This was it. This was the nightmare she had been running from since the moment she packed her bag and left Tyler. Luca emerged from his study. He buttoned his suit jacket, his face a mask of stone. He did not look at Grace. He looked at Rosa. "Show her in," Luca said. He walked over to Grace. He did not touch her, but he stood close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. "Do not say anything unless she asks you a direct question," Luca instructed, his voice low and urgent, "and even then, keep it short. I will handle this." Grace nodded, unable to speak. Her throat felt like it was closing up. Elaine Cooper walked into the room. She was a woman in her 40s with a sensible haircut, a beige trench coat, and a clipboard that she held like a weapon. She looked around the opulent room, her eyes lingering on the expensive art, the high ceilings, and finally landing on Grace with a look of professional suspicion. "Miss Grace Miller?" Elaine asked. "Yes," Grace whispered. "I am Elaine Cooper with the Department of Child Services. We received an anonymous report this morning regarding the welfare of your son, Noah Miller." Grace felt her knees buckle. She sank onto the sofa, clutching the laundry to her chest as if it were armor. "What kind of report?" Luca asked. His voice was smooth, polite, and utterly terrifying in its calmness. Elaine turned to him, unfazed. She adjusted her glasses. "The report alleges that the child is living in an unstable environment, exposed to criminal elements, and that the mother is without means of support, given the address and your reputation, Mr. Romano. The state is obligated to investigate immediately. My reputation is a matter of public gossip, not legal fact," Luca said. He clasped his hands behind his back. "Miss Miller and her son are guests in my home. They are under my protection. And what is the nature of your relationship with Miss Miller?" Elaine asked, pen hovering over her paper. "We are friends," Grace blurted out. Her voice shook, high and brittle. "He's just a friend. He helped me when I had nowhere to go." Elaine looked at Grace, her expression softening slightly but remaining guarded. "Miss Miller, do you have a lease agreement here? Do you have employment? Do you have a plan for the child's future? Or are you dependent on Mr. Romano for all your needs?" I am looking for work," Grace stammered. "I applied at a coffee shop yesterday and a cleaning service. So you are currently unemployed and homeless, relying on the charity of a man with a documented history of police contacts," Elaine summarized. Luca took a step forward. The air in the room grew heavy. Grace saw his hands clench at his sides. She knew he wanted to throw this woman out. She knew he wanted to rage, but she also knew that if he showed even a flicker of aggression, Elaine would call the police, and they would take Noah. Luca forced himself to stop. He took a slow breath through his nose. "Miss Miller is employed by the Romano Group as a consultant," Luca lied smoothly. "She is currently on maternity leave. As for her living situation, this is her residence." Elaine raised an eyebrow. "Do you have documentation for that? My lawyers are faxing it to your office as we speak," Luca said, along with the child's up-to-date medical records from the pediatrician we saw yesterday, and an inventory of the supplies purchased for his care. He pulled his phone from his pocket and tapped the screen. "In fact, my attorney is on the line now." "Would you like to speak with him regarding the harassment statutes concerning anonymous tips that originate from known felons with grudges?" Elaine hesitated. She looked at Luca, then at Grace, who was trembling on the couch. She saw the fear, but she also saw the clean clothes, the healthy baby sleeping in the pristine crib in the corner, and the lack of immediate danger. She lowered her clipboard. "I will review the documents, Mr. Romano. But know this case is open. I will be back. And if I find any evidence that this child is in danger, physical or moral, I will remove him. Do I make myself clear?" "Perfectly," Luca said. Elaine turned and walked out. Rosa escorted her to the door. When the front door clicked shut, the silence that followed was deafening. Grace stared at the floor. The adrenaline that had kept her upright crashed, leaving her hollow. She stood up, her legs shaking uncontrollably, and ran toward the nursery. "Grace," Luca said, reaching for her. She dodged his hand and disappeared into the room where Noah slept. Luca stood in the living room for a moment, running a hand over his face. He felt a murderous rage boiling in his gut. Tyler. This was Tyler's doing. The photos, the tip. It was a coordinated attack designed to hit him where he was soft, and it had worked. He walked to the nursery. The room was dim, lit only by a nightlight shaped like a star. Grace was on the floor, curled into a ball near the crib. She was not making a sound, but her shoulders were shaking violently. Luca's heart twisted. He had seen men broken by torture who looked less defeated than she did right now. He walked over to her and knelt down. He did not say anything at first. He just stayed there, a silent, solid presence in the semi-darkness. Slowly, he reached out. His hand hovered over her back for a second, unsure if she would flinch, before he settled it gently between her shoulder blades. "Grace," he said softly. She turned into him. It was an instinctual movement, like a flower turning toward the sun. She scrambled up from her crouch and buried her face in his chest, clutching the lapels of his jacket. "They are going to take him," she sobbed, her voice muffled against his shirt. "They are going to take him away from me. Luca. Because of me. Because I am here." "No," Luca said. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her tight. One hand cradled the back of her head, pressing her closer. "No, they know who you are," she cried. She was right. That is what she said. "Criminal elements. I brought him into this. I am a bad mother." "You are a good mother," Luca said fiercely. His chin rested on the top of her head. "You are the best mother I have ever seen. You walked through fire for that boy. Do not let them tell you otherwise." He held her while she cried, absorbing her fear. He could feel her heart pounding against his own chest, a frantic bird beating its wings against a cage. His own heart was hammering too, but not from fear. It was pounding with a protective instinct so primal it scared him. After a few minutes, Grace's sobs subsided into hiccups. She pulled back slightly, looking up at him. Her eyes were red and swollen, her lashes spiked with tears. Luca raised his hands and cupped her face. His thumbs brushed away the wetness on her cheeks. The skin was soft, hot from crying. "I will fix this," he whispered. They were so close. The air between them was charged, thick with the shared trauma and the undeniable connection that had been building for days. Luca looked at her lips. They were parted slightly, trembling. He wanted to kiss her. He wanted to kiss the fear out of her, to replace it with the certainty that as long as he drew breath, she was safe. He leaned in. Grace's eyes fluttered shut, their breaths mingled, warm and intimate. Then, Grace stiffened. She placed her hands flat against his chest and pushed, gently but firmly. She pulled back, opening her eyes. There was a fresh wave of pain in them. "I cannot," she whispered. Luca froze. He dropped his hands instantly. "I am sorry. I should not have—" "No," Grace interrupted. "It is not that I do not—" She took a shaky breath. "I am terrified. Luca, I am so scared I can barely think. If I kiss you now, it is because I need you to save me. It is because I am using you as a shield." She looked at him with a heartbreaking honesty. "And you deserve better than to be used like that. I do not want to hide behind you. I want to stand beside you. But I cannot do that while I am shaking apart." Luca looked at her, and his respect for her deepened into something profound. She was offering him a way out, protecting his dignity even while her world was collapsing. "Okay," he said hoarsely. "Okay." He stood up. Offering her a hand, she took it, and he pulled her to her feet. "Pack a bag," Luca said, his voice shifting back to business, though it remained gentle. "Just the essentials. Diapers, formula, a few changes of clothes for you and Noah." "Why?" Grace asked, wiping her face. "Because this house is burned," Luca said. "Everyone knows you are here. Tyler, the Riverside crew, CPS. If we stay here, the pressure will only get worse. They will keep coming until they find a crack." "Where are we going? Somewhere they will not look, somewhere small." The move happened under the cover of darkness. They did not take the limousine or the SUV. They took a nondescript sedan that Luca kept in the back of the garage for emergencies. Luca drove. There was no driver, no Marco, just them. They drove into the heart of the city, where the buildings were tall and packed together like teeth. Luca navigated the streets with ease, finally pulling into the underground garage of a brick apartment building that looked perfectly average. "It is a safe house," Luca explained as he killed the engine. "It is under a shell company. My name is not on the deed. The utilities are paid through a trust. Nobody looks for Luca Romano in a one-bedroom walk-up." They took the elevator to the 4th floor. The apartment was clean but sparse. It had beige walls, standard furniture, and a window that looked out over an alley. It was a universe away from the mansion. Grace set the diaper bag down on the small kitchen table. "It feels normal," she said. "That is the point," Luca said. He locked the door. Engaging 3 separate deadbolts, he carried the portable crib into the bedroom. It was a small room, dominated by a queen-sized bed. There was barely enough space to walk around it. Grace stood in the doorway. "There is only one bed." Luca nodded. "I will take the couch." "No," Grace said immediately. "You are too big for that couch." "Luca, it is a love seat. You will wake up crippled. You take the bed. Noah and I will be fine in the living room." "Grace," Luca said, turning to face her, "I am not letting you sleep on the floor. And the baby needs the quiet of the bedroom. We can share," Grace suggested, then flushed pink. "I mean, it is a big bed. We can put pillows down the middle, like a wall." Luca looked at the bed, then at her. The memory of the near kiss in the nursery was still humming between them. "No," he said firmly, "that is not a good idea. I will take the couch. Do not argue with me. Grace, I am still the boss." He walked past her, grabbing a spare blanket from the closet shelf. He tossed it onto the small leather sofa in the living room. "Go to sleep," he said. "We are safe here. For tonight." The storm hit 2 hours later. It started with a low rumble that shook the window panes, followed by a crack of thunder that sounded like a bomb going off. The sky opened up, rain lashing against the brick building in sheets. Grace woke up when the room plunged into absolute darkness. The streetlights outside had gone out. The digital clock on the nightstand was dead. From the crib, a wail rose up. Noah did not like the dark, and he definitely did not like the thunder. Grace stumbled out of bed, her hands reaching out blindly. "Noah? Mama is coming." She found her way to the crib by instinct, lifting the crying baby. He was trembling. She walked out into the living room, feeling her way along the wall. The apartment was freezing. The heating system must have been electric, and it had died with the power. "Luca?" she whispered. A beam of light cut through the darkness. "I am here." Luca's voice came from the center of the room. He was sitting on the floor, holding a heavy-duty flashlight. He shone it at the ceiling, creating a diffused glow that lit up the room in soft shadows. "Is he okay?" Luca asked. "He is scared," Grace said, walking over to him. "And it is getting cold." "Sit," Luca said. He patted the floor beside him. He had pulled the cushions off the sofa and arranged them on the rug to make a makeshift bed. He had spread the heavy duvet from the guest closet over them. Grace sat down. She settled Noah into her lap, wrapping her own blanket around him. Luca adjusted the flashlight so it wasn't in the baby's eyes. The apartment was silent except for the rain and the occasional roll of thunder. It felt like they were the last 2 people on Earth, drifting in a capsule through space. Grace looked at Luca in the dim light. He was wearing a t-shirt and sweatpants. Stripped of his armor, he looked younger, softer. He hates storms, Grace said, stroking Noah's back. When he was born, there was a thunderstorm. The hospital lost power for 10 minutes. I think he remembers it. Luca looked at the baby, then at Grace. I used to hate them too, he admitted quietly. You? Grace smiled faintly. The man who isn't afraid of anything? I was not always a man, Luca said. When I was a kid, my father was not a kind person. When it stormed, he would get angry. He would drink. The thunder meant I had to hide. Grace's smile faded. She shifted closer to him. I am sorry, she said. Luca shrugged. It was a long time ago, but I learned that the dark is only scary if you are alone in it. He reached out and draped the edge of the duvet over Grace's shoulders, pulling her into the warmth of the nest he had made. Grace shivered, but not from the cold. She felt his arms settle around her, heavy and protective. She leaned into him, her head resting near his shoulder. Noah had calmed down, mesmerized by the circle of light on the ceiling. Tell me something happy, Grace whispered. I need something happy. Luca thought for a moment. He could tell her about the time he bought his first legitimate building, or the time he outsmarted a rival without firing a shot, but those didn't feel right. When I was 10, Luca said, his voice a low rumble in his chest that Grace could feel against her arm. My mother took me to the coast, just us. We stayed in a little shack on the beach. We ate gelato for breakfast. We swam until our lips turned blue. For 3 days, I wasn't a Romano, I was just a boy. Grace listened, picturing a young Luca, laughing and splashing in the ocean. It made her heart ache for the childhood he had lost, and for the childhood she wanted to give Noah. That sounds perfect, she said. It was... Luca agreed. He turned his head. His face was inches from hers. In the reflected light of the flashlight, his eyes were pools of shadow. Grace looked at him. The air in the room shifted again, becoming thick with the unsaid. She could feel his breath on her cheek. She could feel the heat of his body seeping into hers, chasing away the chill of the storm. Elaine Cooper said she would keep monitoring us, Grace whispered, her voice trembling. What if she comes back? What if Tyler tells her more lies? What if they decide I am unfit because I am living in a safe house with a crime boss? Luca's arm tightened around her. He shifted so he was facing her more fully. He reached out with his free hand and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her jawline. Look at me, Grace. She looked up, meeting his gaze. They can come with their forms and their threats, Luca said. They can come with the police. They can come with an army. It does not matter. He leaned closer, his forehead resting against her temple. I will not let them take him from you. He vowed. His voice was fierce, a promise carved in stone. I will burn this city to the ground before I let anyone separate you from that boy. Do you understand me? Grace felt the words vibrate through her. She felt the absolute certainty in them. For the first time in her life, she believed a promise from a man. Yes, she breathed. She turned her face toward his. Their lips were so close they were almost brushing. She could smell the soap on his skin, could feel the tension radiating off him. She wanted to cross the line. She wanted to close the gap and lose herself in him. Luca's hand moved to the back of her neck. His thumb stroked the sensitive skin there. He hesitated. He knew she was vulnerable. He knew she was scared. And he knew that if he kissed her now, in the dark, on the floor of a safe house, there would be no going back. He closed his eyes for a second, fighting a war with his own desires. Then, he pressed a kiss to her forehead. It was lingering, desperate and chaste. Sleep, he whispered against her skin. I am right here. Grace let out a shaky breath. She rested her head on his shoulder, closing her eyes. Her heart was pounding a rhythm that matched his. She was terrified of the future, terrified of the threats circling them. But in this small circle of flashlight, wrapped in Luca's arms, she felt invincible. The storm raged outside, battering the windows with wind and rain. But inside, the darkness was not scary anymore, because she was not alone in it. The war started with a sound that shook the windows of the financial district 3 miles away. It was not a thunderclap from a storm this time, but the man-made roar of structural failure. One of the Romano Syndicate's primary distribution warehouses, a brick fortress on the edge of the waterfront, had been turned into a crater of twisted metal and burning timber in the command center of his main estate. Luca Romano watched the news footage on a wall of monitors, the orange glow of the flames reflected in his dark eyes, turning them into pools of molten copper. He stood perfectly still, his hands clasped behind his back, a posture of absolute control that terrified his men more than any shout of rage could have. Marco stepped into the room, smelling of ash and gasoline. He looked grim, wiping soot from his forehead with a handkerchief. It was a bomb, Marco said, his voice rough from smoke inhalation. A professional job. They blew the support columns first. The whole roof came down in seconds. Casualties? Luca asked. 3 inside, Marco reported. 2 guards and a logistics manager. They did not have a chance. Luca closed his eyes for a brief second. 3 of his people, dead because Darius Hall wanted to send a message. When he opened his eyes again, the fire in them had turned to ice. Darius is done sending messages, Luca said. He's screaming now. He's reckless, Marco warned. He's striking at hard targets in broad daylight. If he's willing to blow up a warehouse, Luca, he's willing to hit anything and anyone. Marco hesitated, then stepped closer, lowering his voice. He knows about the girl. He knows about the baby. If he cannot get to you through your business, he will go for the soft spots. He will target your new attachments. The word attachments hung in the air like a curse. Luca turned away from the screens. He thought of the safe house downtown. He thought of Grace sleeping on the queen-sized bed he had insisted she take, and Noah's small chest rising and falling in the crib. "Lock it down," Luca ordered. "I already put 2 more men in the lobby," Marco said. "Not enough," Luca snapped. "I want a perimeter team in unmarked cars on the street. I want eyes on the alley. I want to know if a squirrel crosses the sidewalk in front of that building. And get the tech team to sweep the apartment for bugs again. Should we move them?" Marco asked. "No," Luca said. "Moving them now is too dangerous. If Darius has eyes on the street, a convoy is just a moving target. We hold the line. And Grace?" Marco asked. "Do we tell her?" Luca paused. He pictured the fear that had been haunting Grace's eyes since the night he found her. She was finally starting to breathe, finally starting to trust that the floor would not drop out from under her. If he told her that a rival gang was blowing up buildings and hunting her down, she would shatter. "No," Luca said firmly. "She does not need to know the details. She just needs to stay inside. Tell the team to be discreet. She sees nothing. She hears nothing. In the safe house." The silence was beginning to feel less like safety and more like captivity. Grace paced the small living room, Noah balanced on her hip. It had been 3 days since they moved in. 3 days of drawn curtains, hushed conversations, and Luca disappearing for hours at a time to handle business he refused to discuss. She knew he was protecting her. She felt the weight of his care in the stocked refrigerator, the high-end baby monitor, and the way he checked the locks every time he came in. But Grace Miller had spent her life surviving on her own wits. Sitting still while a man fought her battles made her skin crawl. She needed to do something. She needed to feel like she had some control over her future. The phone Luca had given her buzzed on the kitchen counter. Grace jumped, startling Noah. She hurried to answer it. The number was blocked. "Hello?" she answered tentatively. "Miss Miller?" a woman's voice asked. It was professional, bright, and completely unfamiliar. "Yes." "Hi. This is Sarah from the Harborview Outreach Center. We are a local charity that helps single mothers get back on their feet. We received your application from the cleaning service you visited the other day. They passed along your info because they thought you might be a great fit for a program we are running." Grace's heart leaped. "Oh, yes, I remember them. We have an administrative opening at our downtown office." The woman continued. "It is entry level, but it comes with benefits and an on-site daycare voucher. We are conducting interviews today. I know it is short notice, but could you meet us?" Grace looked around the apartment. It sounded too good to be true. A job, benefits, daycare. It was the lifeline she had been praying for. I would love to," Grace said. "Where?" "There is a cafe on 4th and Main," the woman said. "The Roasted Bean. It is neutral ground, very relaxed. Can you be there in an hour?" Grace hesitated. Luca had told her to stay inside, but Luca was not here. He was out somewhere in the city, dealing with his world. This was her world. She could not ask his permission to live her life. "I will be there," Grace said. She hung up, her hands shaking with excitement. She quickly dressed in her best blouse. Rosa, the housekeeper who had been staying with them during the days, looked up from her knitting as Grace bustled into the living room. "You are going out?" Rosa asked, frowning. "Mister?" Romano said, "I have an interview." Grace interrupted, breathless. "It is just a few blocks away. A charity. Rosa, this could be everything for Noah. I will only be gone for an hour. Can you watch him?" Rosa looked doubtful, but she saw the desperate hope in Grace's face. She nodded slowly. "Leave the phone on. Kara. If you are not back in 60 minutes, I am calling him. I will be back before you know I am gone," Grace promised. She kissed Noah's forehead, grabbed her purse, and slipped out the door. She texted Luca as she took the elevator down. "Going for a quick errand, back soon. Do not worry." The Roasted Bean was a quiet, dimly lit cafe with exposed brick walls and the smell of burnt sugar. It was the middle of the afternoon, and the place was nearly empty. Grace walked in, scanning the tables for a woman who looked like a Sarah. She checked her watch. She was 5 minutes early. She chose a table near the back, facing the door, just like she had learned to do in the diner. She smoothed her skirt, rehearsing her answers. She needed to sound professional. She needed to sound stable. "Miss Miller?" Grace looked up, a smile ready on her lips. The smile died instantly. Standing over her table was not a woman from a charity. It was a man in a hooded sweatshirt, his face gaunt, his eyes darting around the room with a manic energy. "Tyler." Grace froze. Her blood turned to ice water. "Hello." "Gracie," Tyler said. He pulled out the chair opposite her and sat down. He looked worse than the last time she had seen him. His skin was sallow, his teeth yellowed. He smelled of sweat and desperation. "What are you doing here?" Grace whispered. Her voice was barely audible. "How did you get my number?" Tyler smirked, but it was a twitchy, nervous expression. "I have friends now. Powerful friends. They helped me reach out. The charity." Grace realized with a sickening lurch, "It was you. You were always gullible." Tyler sneered. "Always looking for a handout?" Grace grabbed her purse, her chair scraping loudly against the floor as she stood up. "I am leaving." She turned toward the door. 2 large men in leather jackets were standing in front of the exit. They were not drinking coffee. They were staring directly at her with arms crossed over their chests. Grace spun around. The back exit by the restrooms was blocked by another man. She was trapped. "Sit down, Grace," Tyler hissed. "Do not make a scene." Grace backed away from him, her heart hammering so hard she thought it would burst. "What do you want, Tyler?" "I do not have any money. I do not want your money," Tyler said, standing up and advancing on her. "I want what is mine. You think you can just run off with my kid? You think you can shack up with some Mafia prince and I will just disappear? He is not your kid," Grace said, her voice rising. "You never cared about him. You threw a bottle at his crib. I am his father," Tyler shouted, causing the few other patrons to look up in alarm. "And you are my property. You ruined everything, Grace. Luca Romano is squeezing the city because of you. He's hurting my business. He's hurting my partners." Tyler lunged for her, grabbing her wrist. His grip was clammy and painful. "You are coming with me," he spat. "We are going to go see my friends, and you are going to tell Romano that you are done with him." "Let go of me," Grace screamed. She twisted her arm, clawing at his hand with her free hand. Suddenly, the front glass of the cafe shattered inward with a deafening crash. Everyone screamed. Tyler flinched, loosening his grip. 3 men burst through the broken door. They wore tactical vests and carried weapons that were definitely not for show. They were Luca's men. "Get down!" one of them roared. The 2 men blocking the door drew guns from their jackets. The cafe erupted into chaos. Patrons dove under tables. Gunfire cracked through the air, deafening in the enclosed space. Grace was shoved violently to the side by one of the Riverside thugs. She lost her footing and crashed hard onto the floor, her hip and elbow slamming against the concrete. Pain exploded up her side. Stealing her breath, she curled into a ball, covering her head with her hands. Tyler, seeing the tactical team advancing, panicked. He looked at Grace on the floor, then at the back exit where his path was momentarily clear as the guard moved to engage Luca's team. "I am not going back to jail!" Tyler screamed. He bolted. He scrambled over a table, knocking over a coffee pot, and sprinted out the back door into the alleyway. One of Luca's men moved to pursue, but the team leader shouted, "Secure the girl! The priority is the girl!" Strong hands grabbed Grace by the arms, hauling her up. "Miss Miller, we have to go. Now!" Grace, dazed and limping, was half carried, half dragged out of the shattered cafe to a waiting armored SUV that had screeched to a halt at the curb. The ride back to the safe house was a blur of adrenaline and throbbing pain. When the elevator doors opened on the 4th floor, Luca was standing in the hallway. He looked like a man who had stared into hell. His jacket was gone, his sleeves rolled up, and his face was a mask of terrified fury. "Grace!" He breathed. He rushed toward her. He checked her over frantically, his hands hovering over her injuries. He saw the bruise forming on her cheek, the way she was favoring her left leg, the dust on her clothes. "I am okay," Grace whispered, though she was shaking uncontrollably. Luca turned to the team leader who had brought her in. "Where is he?" Luca demanded. "Where is Tyler?" "He ran," the guard admitted, looking at the floor. "We prioritized the extraction. Boss, the Riverside crew blocked us. It was a setup." "Get out," Luca snarled. The guards retreated, leaving them alone in the hallway. Luca ushered Grace inside the apartment and locked the door with a savagery that nearly broke the bolt. Rosa was standing in the living room, holding Noah. She looked terrified. "Take the boy to the bedroom." "Rosa," Luca commanded. "Close the door." Rosa nodded and fled. Grace limped to the sofa and sat down, wincing. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind anger and humiliation. "You tracked my phone," she said. It was not a question. "Of course I tracked your phone," Luca shouted. He paced the small room, running his hands through his hair. "You walked right into a trap. Grace, I told you to stay inside. I told you it was dangerous." "You did not tell me how dangerous," Grace shouted back, the fear turning into a defensive fury. "You told me to be careful. You did not tell me there was a war starting. You kept me in the dark. I was trying to protect you," Luca yelled, his voice cracked, raw with emotion. "I did not want you to live in fear. I wanted you to have one place where you did not have to look over your shoulder. Well, it did not work." Grace stood up, ignoring the pain in her leg. She poked him in the chest. "I almost got killed today. Luca." Tyler was there. He put his hands on me, and I walked right into it because I thought I was getting a job. I thought I was finally doing something for myself instead of just being your charity case." "Charity case?" Luca looked at her, stunned. "Is that what you think this is?" "What else am I supposed to think?" Grace cried, tears spilling over. "I am living in your house. I am eating your food. I am wearing clothes you bought, and now people are shooting at me because of you. I am trapped. Luca, I am trapped between the streets and your world, and both of them want to eat me alive." Luca grabbed her shoulders. His grip was tight, desperate. "You are not a charity case," he said, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. "And you are not a prisoner." "Then what am I?" Grace asked, searching his face. "Why are you doing this? Why are you risking your empire for a homeless woman and a baby who isn't yours?" "Because I cannot breathe when you are not in the room," Luca confessed. The words tore out of him. He froze, realizing what he had said. The silence in the room was absolute. Grace stared at him, her breath catching in her throat. Luca let out a long, shaky exhale. He stepped closer, invading her space until there was nowhere else to look but his eyes. "I have spent my whole life building walls," he said quietly. "I built an empire to keep people out. I thought if I was powerful enough, I would never be vulnerable. And then you walked into that diner." He reached up, his hand trembling slightly as he brushed a stray lock of hair away from her bruised cheek. His fingers lingered there, rough against her soft skin. "I have never cared about anyone, Grace. Not really, not like this. and it terrifies me. When I saw that tracking dot stop at the cafe, when I heard the glass break over the comms, I thought my heart stopped beating. Grace looked at him. She saw the truth in his eyes, the naked, terrifying vulnerability of a man who was used to controlling everything, admitting he had no control over his own heart. "Luca," she whispered. She did not step back. She did not look away. Her anger evaporated, replaced by a longing so sharp it hurt. Luca looked at her lips. He saw the hesitation, but he also saw the need. "May I?" he asked. A ghost of a question. Grace nodded, yes. He lowered his head slowly, giving her time to run. She did not run. She rose on her tiptoes to meet him. Their lips met. It was not a movie kiss. It was desperate. It tasted of fear and adrenaline and the salt of tears. It was hesitant at first, a testing of boundaries. But then Grace made a small sound in her throat and pressed closer, her hands clutching the front of his shirt. Luca groaned, a low sound of surrender. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her flush against him. He deepened the kiss, pouring years of loneliness into it. His mouth moved over hers with a hunger that was both demanding and reverent. Grace felt the world spin away. There was no Tyler, no Riverside crew, no war. There was just Luca, his heat, his strength, his scent encompassing her. She felt safe, and for the first time, she felt wanted. Not as a possession, but as a necessity. Luca's hand moved up her back, tangling in her hair. He held her like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. They broke apart for air, panting, their foreheads resting together. Grace kept her eyes closed, savoring the feeling of his pulse hammering against her own. "I am not going anywhere," she whispered. "I know," Luca said. "I have you. The moment was perfect, fragile, crystalline, and perfect." And then the door burst open. Luca spun around, placing himself instantly between Grace and the intruder, his hand reaching for a gun he wasn't wearing. It was Marco. He stood in the doorway, his face pale, holding a phone. "Boss," Marco said, breathless. "Get out," Luca snarled. "I said I wanted, it is Darius." Marco interrupted. He sent a video. Luca went still. He looked at Grace, then back at Marco. "Show me." Marco walked over and handed him the phone. Luca watched the screen. Grace could not see the video, but she heard a voice she knew. It was Tyler. He was screaming. "Please, no, I will tell you everything." Then a deeper voice spoke. "Darius, tell me about the kid. Tyler, tell me who the father is. Tell me where they sleep." Luca's hand crushed the phone. He looked up at Marco. "They have Tyler?" Luca asked. His voice dead calm. "They picked him up 3 blocks from the cafe." Marco said. "He's singing." "Luca, he's telling them everything. He's going to tell them that the kid has no legal protection. He's going to tell them that Grace is the weak link." Luca looked back at Grace. The softness of the kiss was gone, replaced by the hard, jagged reality of their situation. "They are going to use him to destroy us," Luca said. He turned to Grace. He did not touch her, but his eyes held hers with a tragic intensity. "The quiet part is over," he told her. "Now we fight." Grace touched her lips, still tingling from his kiss. She looked at the man who had just confessed his soul to her, and then she looked at the door where the danger lay. She squared her shoulders, wincing at the pain in her hip but standing tall. "Then we fight," she said. Luca nodded. He turned to Marco. "Get the car. We're going to finish this." The intelligence came in an encrypted file, delivered not by a courier, but by a terrified associate of Tyler's who had decided he would rather betray the Riverside crew than face Luca Romano's wrath. Marco stood in the center of the safe house living room, the tablet in his hand shaking slightly as he showed Luca the screen. It was a legal filing, drafted and ready to be sent to the district attorney and Child Protective Services. It contained photos of Grace entering Luca's car, bank transfers fabricated to look like payments for services, and a sworn affidavit from Tyler claiming that Luca was running a trafficking ring and using Grace as a front to move women across state lines. It was a lie. It was a monstrous, calculated lie designed to do two things: send Luca to federal prison for the rest of his life and strip Noah from Grace's arms forever. Luca stared at the screen. The rage that had been burning in him for days turned into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. Darius Hall was not just attacking his business anymore. He was trying to destroy the very concept of family. "He's going to drop this tomorrow morning," Marco said, his voice low. "Once this hits the system, Luca, it does not matter that it is fake. CPS will take the boy immediately as a precaution. The feds will freeze your assets. We will be fighting a war on two fronts with our hands tied." Luca handed the tablet back. He did not break it this time. He was past the point of outbursts. "He is not going to drop it," Luca said, "because he is not going to make it to the morning." "We cannot hit him," Marco argued. "He's expecting an attack. He's dug in at the rail yard. If we go in shooting, it will be a massacre. The police will be there in 5 minutes. I am not sending an army," Luca said. "I am going myself." Marco started to protest, but Luca silenced him with a look. "Darius wants a show," Luca said. "He wants to prove he is the new king of Harborview. He thinks I have gone soft. He thinks I'm distracted by the girl. I'm going to call him. I am going to offer him a surrender. And when we meet, I am going to end this." The safe house was quiet. Grace was in the bedroom, standing over the portable crib. Noah was asleep, his thumb tucked securely in his mouth. He looked so peaceful, so completely unaware that his world was balancing on the edge of a knife. Grace felt a presence behind her. She did not turn around. She knew the rhythm of Luca's footsteps now. She knew the way the air shifted when he entered a room. "You are leaving," she said softly. It was not a question. She had seen Marco come and go. She had seen the way Luca was checking his watch, the way he had changed into dark clothing, the way he was systematically checking the magazine of a handgun on the dresser. "I have to," Luca said. Grace turned. Her eyes were wide and swimming with unshed tears. She walked over to him, placing a hand on his arm. His muscles were coiled tight as steel cables. "Do not go alone," she pleaded. "Please, Luca, this is what they want. It is a trap. It is only a trap if I do not know it is there," Luca said. He looked down at her hand on his arm, then covered it with his own. "If I stay here, Grace, they win. They will come with warrants and social workers and lies that I cannot shoot my way out of. They will take him." Grace choked on a sob. She looked back at the crib. "I cannot lose him," she whispered, "and I cannot lose you. Not now, not after everything." Luca stepped closer. The space between them vanished. He took both her hands in his, bringing them to his chest. She could feel the steady, powerful thud of his heart beneath the dark fabric of his shirt. "You are not going to lose anyone," Luca vowed. His voice was rough, stripped of all its usual command, leaving only raw honesty. "Grace, listen to me. Before you walked into that diner, I was a dead man walking. I had money, I had power, but I had nothing. I would rather walk into fire tonight than ever see you back on the street. I would rather die than let them put Noah in a system that does not love him." Grace looked up at him. The tears spilled over. Tracking down her cheeks, she saw the truth in his eyes. He was not doing this for his reputation. He was doing this for them. She leaned into him, burying her face in his neck. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her so tight it almost hurt. One of his hands splayed across her back, protective and possessive, while the other tangled in her hair. "Come back to me," she whispered against his skin. "Promise me." "I promise," Luca said. He pulled back just enough to look at her. His gaze dropped to her lips. This time, there was no hesitation, no fear of overstepping boundaries. He kissed her. It was not like the kiss in the apartment. Desperate and adrenaline-fueled, this was slow. It was deep. It was acclaiming. His lips moved over hers with a terrifying tenderness, tasting the salt of her tears and the sweetness of her breath. Grace melted against him, her fingers curling into his shirt, anchoring herself to him. She felt safe and exposed all at once, her heart beating in sync with his. It was a kiss that promised a future. It was a kiss that said, "Wait for me." When they finally broke apart, they rested their foreheads together, breathing the same air. "If we get through this," Luca whispered, his voice engaging with a new kind of gravity. "We are not going back to how it was. No more guest rooms. No more pretending this is temporary." Grace nodded, her eyes closed. "No more pretending." "You and Noah," Luca said, brushing his thumb across her cheekbone. "You are home. To me." Grace let out a shuddering breath. For the first time in a long time, she believed in a future that did not end in loss. "Go," she whispered, "and come home." The old rail yard by the river was a graveyard of rusted iron and rotting wood. Fog rolled off the water, obscuring the moon and muffling the sound of the city. Luca stood in the center of the main clearing. He was alone. His hands were empty, held out to his sides. From the shadows of a derelict warehouse, Darius Hall emerged. He was flanked by 4 men, all armed. Tyler was there too, looking skittish and terrified, holding a briefcase that likely contained the fabricated evidence. "You came alone," Darius called out, his voice echoing in the damp air. "I am impressed. Romano." "I thought you would send your dogs." "We do not need dogs to settle this," Luca said, his voice calm. "Just you and me." "Darius." Darius laughed. He walked closer, his boots crunching on the gravel. "You think this is a duel? This is an execution. Luca, I have the leverage. I have the girl. I have the feds ready to kick down your door. You are finished." Luca watched him. He watched the way Darius's men were positioned, arrogant, relaxed, assuming the victory was already won. "You made a mistake." "Darius," Luca said. Darius stopped 10 feet away. "Oh, and what is that?" "You involved civilians," Luca said. "You threatened a child. That makes you sloppy." Darius sneered. He raised his hand, a signal to his men. "Kill him." Gunfire erupted, but it did not come from Darius's men. From the rusted shipping containers stacked high around the clearing, silencers hissed. 3 of Darius's men dropped instantly, incapacitated by precision shots to the legs and shoulders. Darius spun around, realizing too late that Luca's surrender was a Trojan horse. Marco and a team of Luca's most loyal enforcers emerged from the fog. Darius pulled a gun from his waistband, wild panic in his eyes. He aimed not at Marco, but at Luca. Luca moved. He did not run away. He surged forward. He closed the distance just as Darius fired. The bullet tore through the meat of Luca's left shoulder. The impact staggered him, a hot flare of agony that nearly brought him to his knees. But Luca did not stop. He gritted his teeth, fueled by the image of Grace waiting in the safe house. He slammed into Darius, knocking the weapon away. They hit the gravel hard. Darius scrambled, trying to reach for the gun, but Luca was faster. Despite the blood soaking his shirt, Luca pinned Darius to the ground, his good hand gripping Darius's throat. "It is over," Luca snarled, his face inches from his enemies. Tyler, seeing the tables turn, dropped the briefcase and tried to run. Marco was there in a second, tripping him and holding him down with a boot to the back. "Do not kill him," Marco shouted. "Luca, the feds!" Luca's grip tightened on Darius's windpipe. He wanted to end it. Every instinct in his blood screamed to crush the life out of the man who had threatened Noah. But he remembered his promise. He remembered the legitimate life he wanted to build. He released his grip, shoving Darius's head into the dirt. "Get him up!" Luca gasped, clutching his bleeding shoulder. 10 minutes later, a black sedan rolled into the yard. A man in a gray suit stepped out, Agent Miller, a contact Luca had been feeding information to for years. A man who wanted to clean up the city's corruption. Luca kicked the briefcase toward him. "Trafficking, extortion, and attempted murder," Luca said, his voice tight with pain. "And the man who falsified the witness statements is right there." Agent Miller looked at Darius, then at Tyler, then at Luca's bleeding shoulder. "You are cutting it close." "Romano," the agent said. "I am done," Luca said. He leaned against a crate, his vision swimming. "Take them, I am out." The agent nodded. His team moved in to cuff Darius and Tyler. Luca turned to Marco. "Take me home." The hours of waiting were an agony Grace had never known. She sat in the living room of the safe house, Noah sleeping in her arms because she could not bear to put him down. Every car that passed on the street below made her jump. When the lock finally clicked, Grace was on her feet before the door opened. Luca stumbled in, supported by Marco. His face was gray, drained of color. His left arm was strapped to his chest, and his shirt was saturated with dark, wet blood. "Luca!" Grace screamed. She rushed to him, nearly dropping Noah in her panic before realizing Rosa was there to take the baby. She reached for Luca, her hands hovering, terrified to touch him and cause more pain. "I am okay," Luca gritted out. Though his voice was slurred, it went through. Just the shoulder. "Let's get him to the bed," Marco said, grunting under Luca's weight. They got him into the bedroom. Grace worked with frantic efficiency, cutting away his ruined shirt while Marco brought the medical kit. She'd seen injuries before, living on the streets, but seeing Luca's torn flesh made her stomach turn. Yet, her hands were steady. She cleaned the wound, her tears falling silently onto his chest as she worked. "You came back," she whispered, taping the gauze in place. "You idiot! You came back! I promised!" Luca rasped, his eyes fluttering open. Later, after Marco had left to secure the perimeter and Rosa had made tea, the room was quiet. Luca was propped up against the pillows, his color returning slightly. Grace sat on the edge of the bed, her hand resting on his good arm. She traced the edge of the white bandage that stood out starkly against his tanned skin. "Is it really over?" she asked softly. "Darius is in federal custody," Luca said. "Tyler is cutting a deal to testify against him. The evidence they had, it is gone. Or rather, it is being used to prove they were framing me." He reached out and took her hand, bringing her knuckles to his lips. "I am selling the warehouses. Grace, the illegal ones. I'm selling the clubs." Grace looked at him, surprised. "What?" "I have been moving money into construction and hospitality for 5 years, Luca explained. "I was waiting for the right time to cut the other cords. Tonight was the time. I cannot have enemies like Darius if I want to have this." He looked around the small, modest room, and then at her. "I cannot raise a son in a war zone," he said. Grace's breath hitched. "A son? You really mean that?" she whispered. Luca looked at her with total clarity. "I have never meant anything more." 2 days later, Elaine Cooper returned. She did not bring the police. She brought a file folder and a look of apology that sat uncomfortably on her stern face. "We received the updated report from the district attorney's office," Elaine said. "Sitting in the safe house living room, it appears the initial tip regarding Mr. Romano was fabricated by parties with criminal intent." Grace sat straight, her hand gripping Luca's. "And Noah?" Elaine looked at the baby, who was playing on the floor with a set of blocks. "The investigation has found that Noah Miller is in a stable, supportive environment. He's healthy, well-fed, and attached to his caregivers. We are closing the file, Miss Miller." Grace let out a sob of relief, burying her face in Luca's shoulder. Luca wrapped his good arm around her, staring at Elaine with a hard, protective look. "Thank you," Luca said. "Just keep him safe." "Mr. Romano," Elaine said, standing up. "That is all we ask. I intend to." Luca said. 6 months later, the construction site of the new Romano Hotel was bustling with activity. It was a legitimate project, steel and glass rising into the skyline, a symbol of a new era. Grace walked through the lobby, holding a clipboard. She wore a hard hat and a fitted blazer. She wasn't just a figurehead. She was learning the management side of the business, working her way up. She felt useful. She felt proud. She walked out into the sunshine where a small park had been built adjacent to the hotel. It was a public space, Luca's gift to the city. Noah was there, sitting in a bucket swing. He was bigger now, his cheeks rosy, his hair thick and dark. Luca stood behind him. The sling on his arm was long gone, leaving only a scar he rarely talked about. He was laughing, pushing the swing gently. "Higher!" Noah squealed, clapping his hands. "Higher, Papa!" Luca mimicked, pushing him a little harder. Grace leaned against the fence, watching them. The sight of the feared ex-Mafia boss pushing a toddler on a swing, his face lit up with genuine joy, made her chest ache with happiness. He had shed the darkness like a snake shedding skin. He was still tough, still commanding, but the cruelty was gone. Luca saw her. He stopped the swing and scooped Noah up, walking over to the fence. Done with the inspection? Luca asked, grinning. The lobby flooring is behind schedule, Grace teased, taking Noah from him and kissing the baby's cheek. I might have to write you up. I will take it up with management, Luca said, leaning over the fence to kiss her. That evening, they put Noah to bed in their new house. It was not the fortress mansion on the hill. Luca had sold that. This was a house in a quiet suburb, with a yard and friendly neighbors and no security cameras in the hallway. They sat on the living room couch, the same way they had that night in the safe house during the storm. The TV was murmuring low in the background. Grace leaned her head on Luca's chest, listening to his heartbeat. It was steady, strong. Luca shifted. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Grace sat up, her eyes widening. It is not big, Luca said, looking suddenly nervous. He opened the box. Inside was a simple gold band with a single, clear diamond. It was modest. It was real. I did not want something flashy. He said, I wanted something that felt like us. Grace covered her mouth with her hands. Grace, Luca said, his voice thick with emotion. I am still learning how to be the man you deserve, but I want to keep learning. I want to earn the right to be your partner and Noah's father every single day for the rest of my life. He took the ring out of the box. Will you marry me? Grace looked at the ring, then at the man who had saved her. The man she had saved right back. Yes, she whispered, tears spilling over. Yes, Luca. 1,000 times yes. He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Grace threw her arms around his neck, and he pulled her onto his lap, burying his face in her hair. They laughed, a sound of pure release, while holding each other tight. Later. They curled up together on the couch, the house quiet around them. The moonlight streamed in through the window, illuminating the simple life they had fought so hard to build. Grace ran her hand over Luca's heart. You know, she whispered into the silence, that night at the bus stop, when you said, you can stay here tonight. Luca tightened his arm around her shoulders. You gave me more than shelter. Luca, she said softly, you gave me a life. Luca kissed the top of her head. He looked at the ring on her finger and toward the hallway where their son was sleeping. And you gave me a reason to live it, he replied. He held her a little tighter, knowing that for the first time in his history, he had something worth changing for, and he was never letting go. Thank you so much for reading You Can Stay Here Tonight, he said. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Grace, Noah and Luca, as much as I enjoyed writing it. It is a story about finding light in the darkest places and the power of choosing love over fear. Now, Anne, I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below telling me where you are reading or listening from. Which part of the story touched your heart the most? Don't forget to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories so you never miss a new adventure. Your support means the world to me. Thank you for your time, and until the next story,